Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's THEWFIA.org, and become a member today.
I want to welcome today everybody to the PWZ referee Jesse Fields, who's been all over my TV as of late. How's it going, sir?
It's going well. I have noticed that I've been all over people's TVs as of late, and it's been very, very nice.
I think I sent you a picture the other day. I was watching. I was like, oh, hey, there's Jesse. I think you were in the ring with Ricky Morton.
Yeah, I don't think it was Ricky. It was one of the other matches, but
okay.
Yeah, because I remember when we were doing the tapings, like everything's blocked off in show wise, and I was like, man, I got a lot of matches.
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah, because I was watching I was going to bring this up a little bit later. The Highland Park Cares for Cooper last night, and I noticed you were right there. You had shared it, so I said, oh, I didn't even know that had streamed, so I said, let me put that on. I watched it. It was an enjoyable show.
Yeah, that was it was kind of a stripped down version, because there were several more matches that we did that didn't make air, so I wasn't sure how much of that stuff was going to make. I did a triple threat match. I did 3 matches on that show, and they only aired like 2 of them, which was, yeah, I time constraints. I could see that.
I enjoyed it because it reminded me. I mean, obviously, it's a very positive thing to be being a part of, but it reminded me of like watching the NWA as a kid back in the '80s when I grew up, and then they would show clips of like arena matches and stuff like that. That's what that presentation looked like, and I thought it was very, very cool. On top of actually being a very good wrestling program yesterday, you've been working with the NWA a little bit now, but I've been kind of critical of the NWA, even though it is actually my favorite brand these days. It's kind of rough sometimes. It's gotten better. It's improved. But I thought that when Power first started out and Billy took over, I thought it was a fantastic wrestling show. And then it seemed like during the pandemic and coming back from the pandemic, it struggled a little bit for about a good year or so.
I think a lot of wrestling companies had that same issue, just because it was such a very interesting time where it wasn't very long into the pandemic that some shows were able to start running with like social distancing and all those other things. Because I started doing some shows towards the back end of 2022 or 2020, and it was a very different feel for wrestling. Wrestling matches had to be very, very different. One of the biggest shows that I did was the Collective for GCW in Indianapolis, and that was in like I think October 2020. Right. And it was, of course, it had to have social distancing and all that stuff, and wrestling felt different, and I felt like there was going to be a big change for the industry going forward. I just wasn't sure how the change was going to be. And I think you're correct, because I do remember watching Power, and it was definitely done, I would say, like the old studio tapings were, it had a modern feel for the vintage, and now I think they're trying to get a vintage feel back for the modern era.
Yeah, I think that they're in different buildings now, bigger, not necessarily just the television studios. They're in a little bit bigger buildings, and they're trying new things. I don't think necessarily that that's a bad thing. It's just that it's either some of the story writing, or excuse me, some of the, how that goes, and some of the talent that they use is sometimes a little questionable. And for me, being such an old school traditional fan, I'm not into comedy. I'm not into, you know, hardcore stuff at all. I'm a straight traditional guy. I grew up in the 1980s, so I love the old school professional wrestling, which they've improved upon quite a bit, I think. But sometimes there's just a little bit too much other stuff out there, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's something, again, a lot of promotions are starting to adapt to, where you want to appeal to such a wide fan base. Like,
yes.
The big example is GCW used to be just strictly a deathmatch company, and that's really what they were known for, and they're still known for. But over time, you have to realize, in order to grow, you have to expand outside of your wheelhouse. So you're going to start running towns in athletic commission states that are not going to allow thumbtacks and light tubes. You have to be able to adapt. And in order to appeal to the crowd and keep it to the masses and keep everybody happy, you kind of have to have a variety. You need to have, I wouldn't say like every show needs to have the same type of, like, one hardcore match, one comedy match, one high flyer match, one tag match. But I do feel like having a diversity of matches, because you may have kids coming to the show that may not care about the two big wrestlers beating the holy hell out of each other. They want to watch a good little fun comedy match to make them laugh and get up and be excited. Dad wants to watch a good submission match or a technical match. The middle brother wants to see a couple guys get hit with chairs. It's kind of one of those things where you kind of have to start adapting to the changes. Like, it is good to stay a very traditional company, but I think NWA has they've got their foothold where there's something for everybody. You have a wonderful women's division, so that's great for young girls growing up, seeing women talent being in a very prominent spotlight. You've got a lot of the technical wrestlers, the high flying wrestlers. You've got a bunch of big brutes like Knox and Murdoch. Then you got some guys that can go out and have hardcore matches, but still tell a story while doing it. So I think a lot of companies are starting to come into their own of just being like that conglomerate. It's a WWE formula of, like, give them all the flavors of ice cream, let them choose which flavors of the ice cream they want to consume.
As we've said on this program numerous times, that it's wrestling is a variety show, though. It is, because there's got to be something for everyone. And you're right. It's just it doesn't mean that everybody's going to like everything on it. I mean, WWE could put on a show and you could sit there and cringe at some things that WWE does on their television program, but you might like the next segment, something like that.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. The best analogy is going to movies. Okay, you're not a fan of horror movies, so you're not going to go see the Jason slasher films, or you're not a fan of comedy, so you're not going to go see an Adam Sandler movie. Okay, well, if you're not a fan of deathmatch wrestling, don't watch ICW. If you're not a fan of comedy, don't watch Kaiju Big Battle. If you're somebody who likes good action movies, then watch AEW or NWA or GCW. So it's just one of those, like, it's just, I always say it's either like ice cream or movies. Like, everybody has their preference. There's nothing wrong with your preference, so long as you're supporting the industry as a whole. It's what matters, because when people start shutting down on wrestling entirely, that's when the industry starts to suffer. So long as people are paying attention to professional wrestling and giving money to the industry, I'm fine with it.
It's very interesting what you said there, because it seems that the whole industry as a whole is on an upswing as of late. There's a lot of attention on a lot of companies right now, and it's just there's so much television out there between, as we were talking before off air, IWTV, Fight Plus, and of course regular cable television. There's so much professional wrestling out there today. It's kind of one of those things, like, you can't escape professional wrestling these days.
No. And I think I was born at the tail end of the 80s, and I grew up in the 90s. And it was a very similar thing getting into like 96, 97, where
Right.
professional wrestling was in the public view a lot. Especially the turn with the Attitude Era, WWF versus WCW. They had their merchandise everywhere. Talent were doing interviews on late night talk shows, morning talk shows. People were appearing in comedy sitcoms as guest stars. You couldn't walk down the toy aisle without seeing rows of WWF figures. And it was just one of those things where, like, it was in the public consciousness. And then when you take megastars from the industry and put them in the normal pop culture of movies and television and music, wrestling's out there to everybody. It was with The Rock, John Cena, Hogan. Like, put them in anything. Doesn't matter if you're a wrestling fan or not. You know who those people are. You know they're professional wrestlers. Yeah. And it's with today. There's so much accessibility to media, because growing up, you had to either catch Raw when it was live, SmackDown on Thursdays. If you watch Nitro and you had TiVo or DVR back then, or a VHS player, that was the only way you could watch replays. You didn't have independent wrestling shows streaming. It wasn't until YouTube came around that people started to utilize it to put Ring of Honor, Chikara, CZW, Japan, all that stuff that we slowly started getting access to. When I broke in the business in 2005, YouTube was still a very, very basic thing. And I was still going over to people's houses to watch tapes. So tape trading was still a very big thing in the early 2000s. So the way that media accessibility is now, there's no excuse for saying, oh, well, I can't find wrestling out there that I like.
No, you're right. You're right. Because there is, between YouTube, you know what I mean, is an amazing thing. Like you said about the whole tape trading thing. I was very heavy into tape trading in the 90s up until probably, I don't know, my son was born, my oldest son, which was probably 2006. I was still trading while my oldest was born for quite a few years. I mean, there wasn't a day that went by that there wasn't a package sitting on my porch full of VHS tapes, you know. And that was probably one of the greatest things ever, because I used to be able to get tapes from Japan, Mexico, all this stuff that aired across the United States, independent stuff. And while it was a very glorious time for professional wrestling, I don't think it matches today as far as the accessibility. And YouTube is
nowhere near that.
You can find so much on YouTube alone. So many promotions stream on YouTube. It's amazing, you know? Yeah.
And like and I wouldn't even say so much as it was tapes. It was, we knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody that was able to pirate or torrent something and download it and burn off a bunch of DVDs. Right. So we'd have a stack of DVDs like Chikara, King of Trios, something from Japan, something from AMLL, had this whole stack of stuff, and we would just toss it in a DVD player and sit there and watch it. And like the wrestlers would be excited watching that. Oh man, look at that move, rewind it. I want to take a look at that. I want to see if I can figure that out. And we'd be sitting there and somebody be trying to figure out how to do whatever they just saw on the tape. And this is like 2006, 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
And now, like I said, you can just type in something on YouTube, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about you breaking into the business. You said 2005?
Yeah, I started going to independent wrestling shows when I realized that they were in Nashville. And I started going to indie shows about tail end of 2004. Okay. I remember going to like the last TNA show at the fairgrounds, at the Asylum. I think that was September, October 2004, right before they moved to Florida. And then that's when I found out, oh yeah, there's weekly independent wrestling at the fairgrounds at this wonderful building called Stadium Inn.
Was that Burt Prentice that ran those shows?
It was Burt Prentice. You can ask anybody that's like a Nashville original, like Jeremiah Plunkett,
Mm-hmm.
We got stories from Stadium Inn and the fairgrounds because Plunkett was around when I was breaking in. I think he had been in the business a year or two before I broke in.
Right.
I started training in the summer of '05. I actually trained to be a wrestler. I was 15 years old, 120 pounds, real geeky looking, did not fit the bill. But I trained and was eventually told, like, hey, look, you're too small. You don't have a look. Be a manager, be a referee, talk on the mic, be a ring announcer or something, but you're not going to be a wrestler. And I kind of kept at it for about another few months into 2006, and eventually Bert stopped running these shows, and then Tony Falk from Paducah, Kentucky, started running shows at Stadium Inn, and I started going to those shows and got to know him and his son. And eventually they said, oh, well, you've had some training. Well, we need somebody to be a referee. Have you ever been a referee before? I said, no, I haven't. I said, all right, well, we'll get you a shirt and give you a match, see how you do. And that's what they did. They gave me a match. I had very basic instructions on what to do. I went out there and did them. Didn't suck. So from there, they said, okay, well, we'll start working with you to be a referee. And then maybe, if you, after some time, you still want to be a wrestler, we'll try to train you again. And it just ended up being, I worked with another referee for a couple shows, and then he was gone, so it was just me. And I barely knew what I was doing. So then I had to go out there and do every match for a while. And I got my reps in, and I eventually got really good at it and just decided, all right, well, I'm just going to stick being a referee. I think I can get more. There's more potential to be a referee and get booked places than probably a wrestler right now. I was wrong because I stayed very, very localized for many, many years. I was too afraid to branch out. But I started reffing at the back end of '06 and still doing it.
You mentioned Cowboy Tony Falk. So was he running, was it NWA Southern All-Star Wrestling?
No. So the NWA Saw didn't come around until 2011, 2012. The original Saw was Southern All-Star Wrestling.
Correct.
And that was run by TJ Weatherby in a town called Millersville. And we had a building called the Sawmill.
Okay.
And one of the guys who did production for USWO also did stuff for, it would be Kroll, Timmy Kroll.
Right.
He was doing the production up there, and he asked me, hey, would you come up here? They're getting ready to start doing TV. They rebranded themselves as Showtime All-Star Wrestling, and that ended up being Reno Riggins, Paul Adams, TJ, and Kroll, and that was the TV product. There were two NWA promotions in Nashville, or not in Nashville per se, but in the area. You had NWA Main Event, which was Mike Porter, and then you had NWA Top Rope, which was Mike Searcy. And they were NWA affiliates, so they paid their yearly fee to be under the NWA banner. So, to be technical, I was an NWA referee back in those days because I wore an NWA referee shirt. I did NWA title matches, but the company didn't have the prestige in that time frame that it used to and that it has now.
It was a very weird time for the NWA.
It was.
At that time. They got a little bit of a boost working with TNA, and then when that affiliation dropped, they kind of, got kicked to the curb a little bit again, until they got, I think, and then they started doing the Hollywood stuff for a little bit as well.
Yeah. And it was about that time. It was 08, 09, I started doing stuff at NWA Main Event. That's when I got to work with Rudy Charles initially, because he was coming in as a referee. They had him doing the Dan O'Manley manager gimmick. Mike Posey was there wrestling. Corey Hollis was wrestling. Bill Behrens was actually the main producer and director for that NWA stuff in Nashville. So I'd worked with Bill for many, many years. At that point, I would occasionally go out to Lebanon, Tennessee, where Mike Searcy ran Top Rope, and I would go out there and work those shows. And we had a nice variety of stuff in Nashville, but it was never anything that got a major foothold and traction. Like Saw towards the end of 2010, there was a time from middle 09 till middle 2010 that I was gone. I was in the Air Force. And when I was discharged and I came back, I kind of just fell right back into the fold and kind of fell right back. I got right back into Saw right as the momentum had started to pick up with TV. Shows were doing a lot better. Attendance was better. And we were traveling all over the state of Tennessee doing TV tapings. And I mean, we had 300-400 people each night.
Wow. That's good.
It was,
oh God.
Nashville was a hotbed in that time of like 08 to 2011, because USWO was still running Nashville. Porter was still running a building in Nashville. So you had like wrestling on Thursday, wrestling on Friday, wrestling on Saturday, and occasionally Sundays and Wednesdays. And if you worked all those shows, you were getting 4 or 5 nights a week of
Wow.
work, just local. And I mean, some guys were getting paid really well. That was just the main group that they did, and then some started to travel. And that was my problem then, was I didn't travel. I didn't think I was good enough to travel when, I probably should have, and it would have made me better, but hindsight.
Now you mentioned a name when talking about Saw that I interviewed somewhat recently in Reno Riggins, probably a couple months ago. What were your interactions like with him? I thought he was a fantastic interview.
You have to know Reno.
Hours. Yeah,
you have to know Reno.
some of the stories I thought were fantastic that he was telling, especially of him training with Tojo Yamamoto, making him run around in circles around the arena for hours.
I've heard that story.
Basically trying to run him off, and was basically, "Oh, you're still here? Come back tomorrow," and then making him do that same thing for like weeks and weeks and weeks before he actually got into the ring.
Yep. Yeah, you have to know Reno. He has this weird sense of humor, where he'll start telling you something and you like, oh wow, he's actually being serious about it, and then it turns out he's been absolutely ribbing you the whole time. It just you always had to be on your toes with him, because he would always come up with something. And I was young and naive, and he was like, "Hey, I need you to do, you need you to be here at this time for vignettes and help us do this stuff." I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." I get there at the building super early. Nobody's there. Nobody's there for hours. Hey, I was here for the vignettes. Oh, yeah. We're gonna do them now. So I'd go do something else. Come back. Hey, when are we gonna do this? Oh, we already did them. We don't need you now. And he would just do stuff like that, just to absolutely mess with me. Eventually, like, I got to figure out his humor.
Yeah,
and I would always try to give it back to him periodically, and he didn't like that. He liked being the one to rib people. He didn't like being ribbed. But yeah. Reno, God, it was so good when we were doing TV with him, because he still had the passion, and he wanted us to put out a good product. He did not want bad matches. If a match sucked, because this was before we were using radios or IFBs or anything for the referees. If a match sucked, he would walk out onto the ramp, walk to the ring, get the referee's attention, and then they'd just stop the match. And we would either redo it or just pull everybody out of the ring. Like, he didn't want to put bad matches out, which was a very rare thing that ever happened. Everybody went out there, and when we were doing Saw, everybody gave the 110%. We were doing a show in Old Hickory, Tennessee, and Vordell Walker was working Ricochet. 3 minutes into the match, Ricochet shoots Vordell into a corner, and we hear this loud bang, and the little rivet underneath the ring that holds the crosswire just completely sheared off. So the ring starts to kind of collapse. And again, we don't have radios or anything. Reno comes off commentary, grabs me and another referee, and is like, "Hey, go out there, check on the ring, tell the other ref, tell them to tear the ring down. Don't kill themselves, but we're going to make great TV out of this." Because he had a welder, so he knew he could fix the ring. Right. So we go out there and we tell them, "Hey, be safe, but tear the ring down." So next thing we know, Vordell's pulling a turnbuckle off and beating Ricochet with it, and they're taking huge bumps, and it looks like the ring's going to collapse. And from that point on, the crowd never sat down. The crowd was up and hot, and he knew when we had something, he's just going to let it go, because he said, this is what people are going to talk about. This is what's going to get eyes on our product, asses every 18 inches. Let it go. And that was the thing. Reno always wanted to make sure we were successful. And while he had the helm, we were successful.
Yeah. I discovered that during its existence. I think it was shows were up on YouTube, and I believe they had a website where they put them up. I'm going back a number of years, so my memory is a little hazy. And I thought that promotion had so much promise, and it was such a good product that they were turning out. It was very old school professional wrestling, and it was kind of like for the modern era, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it a lot, and I still go back and watch it every now and again.
Yeah, because it was around that time that we took the hiatus. It was like around the back end of 2010, 2011. Reno kind of took a sabbatical. Paul Adams dipped out for a while. And then they brought everything back as NWA saw. And I think that was because Kroll bought into the NWA partnership or whatever and made it a franchise. So they did a relaunch and a rebrand as NWA Saw. And I was never a part of that one.
Okay.
I never got to be a part of the relaunch. I was never part of that product. But what they did is they reformatted it. We did the studio style TV, and they kind of kept the formula, but the production was upgraded a little bit. Lighting was a lot better. Cameras were a lot better. They were able to bring in a lot of upstart talent that would eventually go on to do a lot of great things. And again, they had the viability to be a pretty solid product. And then I don't know what happened. I wasn't very connected with people there at the time. And I heard things just kind of fell apart, and they just never ran.
Yeah.
And what really sucked, because they were the last foothold of a home promotion in Nashville. We've never really had a steady home promotion since like the mid 2000s.
Let's see what else here. Now you're mentioning Paul Adams. That was the manager, correct?
He was a manager. He was
away.
Also one of the producers. Yeah. God, absolute waste of losing Paul.
He worked up here a lot. Now I'm in Connecticut. He worked up here a lot before going down there, I believe. If I remember
he was from upstate New York.
Yeah. He worked for Northeast Wrestling, which at one point in the beginning was an NWA group as well, but I don't think that affiliation lasted very long. But
yeah, he worked a lot of the shows up that way. He worked New York quite a bit. There was, I think it was that.
He's also on the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm trying to remember the name of the terrible throwback wrestling show that had Jake the Snake, who was completely obliterated. Paul was the manager for like the tag team in the very first match, and he was part of that, and he was just always very integral in the backstage and inner workings for wrestling shows, because he was one of the guys that would write the show. And I got really close with Paul at one point. Like, he was always grabbing me to be a camera guy, and we would ride somewhere and he's pitching all these ideas, and I'd hear all these really cool ideas. And it was like, just hearing him come up with stuff, he would just kind of just like, I think that would be a really good idea. And it was just so interesting to see how his mind would work for putting wrestling together, and putting matches and programs together. Watching him work was so great, because like he understood what needed to happen.
Right.
And eventually, like, he got burnt out with wrestling, like with everybody. There was a point where he just got real burnt out. And for a brief time, he lived with my old roommate and I. My old roommate was one of the on-air commentators for Saw for a long time, former radio DJ in Nashville. And so it was kind of cool, because like when he was living with us, he kind of started getting that spark again, because he's like, hey, let me run this idea by you. Because he had two people in wrestling he could bounce stuff off of.
Right.
And it was just, when we got the news that he had passed away, it Because I think if he were still alive today, he would be involved. I would want to say he would have found a way to get involved with NWA. I feel like he would be up there doing something with them, and the product would be a little different, but I think it would probably be on the same trajectory. But it would have been great to have seen Paul up there working with Barons and a couple others.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you may be right about that, because the NWA could use something like that. And one of the things that I absolutely love, is when I'm watching the ending credits, is seeing Bill Barron's name at the end of the credits. So it's having him still involved with the NWA to some extent, to me, is amazing. I've always been a fan of his work, whether it be NWA Wildside, NCW, or what have you. Even TNA, he was part of that as well for some time as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
he was a big part of early TNA.
Well, because they were sort of closely related to Wildside in a way, or they would bring up a lot of Wildside talent.
So the way that it worked was the ring stayed at the fairgrounds, and so long as it wasn't a flea market weekend, they would leave everything up. That Bert Prentice would use the ring, because I think the ring was Mike Cersei's, and it was an old WCW ring up until they went to the 6-sided ring. So you would have a combination of Bert Prentice's USA Championship talent doing like pre-show stuff. Then you had NWA Wildside, where you had AJ Styles, Mike Posey, and all those guys coming up from Georgia. And it was an interesting mix, because I think that was like the foundation of early TNA, was like Bert Prentice, Barons, Jarrett, and like the big company cast-offs. And I think the formula that they put together at the time, it's why Impact is, even though they're rebranded, they're still around.
Yes.
Like, everybody thought TNA was going to go under, or Impact was going to go under. No, they are still a very vibrant company. They're still thriving. They're still very successful. And I think that shows with like the foundation that was laid by those guys.
And I think
they're just following that formula.
Some of the stuff that Impact is doing now, like they're kind of, it's like low key, like the greatest stuff that they're doing, or some of the greatest stuff out there in wrestling right now. They're a very good company, but there's times where it's just not consistent enough. Like they'll do really good for like a year, and then a lot of that talent, because they don't sign. Seems like they don't sign anybody to like long-term contracts. It seems, and so then when everybody's contract expires,
I don't know anything about that side of it.
No, that's just from what I see. Like when people leave, then all of a sudden it looks like they're struggling to, get stuff going again. It seems, but that seems to be the formula, at least. I'm going to actually Victory Road in next month it is in New York. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. The last Impact show I went to was Bound for Glory 2018, and it was probably one of the most incredible shows I've ever been to live. Actually, they put on a tremendous live show if you're there as a fan. Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I've been to several shows. I remember going to Slammiversary 07 when it was at Municipal. There was Slammiversary. It was either Slammiversary or something that they did at the Tennessee State Fairgrounds. It's one of the last times they ever got to run there. NWA 70 was in the same building, and then I did an Impact taping in Nashville at Skyways as backstage crew, and then I did the Impact taping this past July in Chicago, and like the fans are absolutely incredible for that company. They are true fans. They are dedicated fans, and that's the thing. When you see that fans are still caring about a product, I do wish that they were on a more accessible platform. I feel as though if it was something more people could just accidentally stumble on, they would have a whole lot more.
They do have the subscription service through YouTube, which is I think like $5 a month. You get the weekly TV because access is a very that's only limited on limited cable network. So I subscribe to that. Plus you get like monthly specials, like the equivalent to a pay-per-view type thing.
Yeah,
So it's
something like that.
it's yeah, and then you get all these bonuses. They do like another exclusive show just for that, etc., and all sorts of exclusive stuff. For my money, for $5 a month, I think that it's probably the best $5 spent per month. I think.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah, I mean all the content that they're putting out there, all the
Yeah.
extra backstage stuff, the BTI stuff, like you get your money's worth easily.
Yeah. What was it? What are your interactions with Bill Barron's like, working with the NWA for so many years?
It was funny. Like back in the day, I didn't know who he was, just because I was a young kid. I wasn't very connected with wrestling that much. But it was always interesting because we always had the pre-show meetings, and he would explain how things needed to be. And I would just see him interact with everybody backstage because, we really just had like one floor cam, one hard cam, no TV production. So he's backstage kind of like directing everything. And hearing him give critiques and feedback to everybody, I would always try to like listen in to hear if he was ever saying anything about referees or whatever. And he would critique me quite a bit. And I would use some of those critiques and eventually would make me a little bit more TV ready. When I first did the tapings for NWA last July, and they said, you need to go talk to Bill, get paperwork settled and all that stuff. And I walked up to him, not expecting him. And he goes, "Oh, Jesse, haven't seen you in so long." And it was like, cool, he still remembers me. And so every time I've been around Bill, we always kind of throw stories back and forth about funny things that happened, how much we hated the building that we were in, how hot it was. Just lots of little funny things, because I would stand there and gorilla with him before I would go out, and just share a laugh before I'd have, like, we do our preload and whatever. And for the referees, typically Bill's the one that's in our ear giving time cues. So it was just like old times, Bill telling me what to do. So, again, he's just a wealth of knowledge. And anytime I see him critiquing somebody or giving feedback to somebody, it's always good to kind of eavesdrop, because it may be centered to them, but it's always kind of good to hear somebody giving that kind of feedback, especially who's been there, knows what's successful, knows what works. Find something that he said that you can apply to yourself.
Right. Now, what about Cowboy Tony and working with him for that brief period? I was a Tony Falk fan. I probably caught him a little bit later in his career, growing up in the 1980s, early 1990s in World Class. So that's
probably the Boy Tony era.
Yeah, that and USWA, going back to Memphis and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I will tell you, Tony has always been one of my favorite people to work for, just because he's so damn funny.
Yeah.
He would just start cutting promos on people for no reason, and it was always funny. And every time I worked with him, it was great. He made sure I was taken care of. The only reason I stopped working for USWO was essentially because the company had to fold.
Right.
They had nowhere else to go. And there's been a recent revival in Nashville, but I was not asked to be a part of it, so I don't know how that's going. But Tony was always great to see him, and I would see him at conventions where they would have wrestling personalities, and his son LT would be there and all these other things. And I was doing an event with the Tennessee Ghostbusters, because I'm part of that group. And we're at a con, and I've got my flight suit on, my pack and everything. And I wasn't paying attention because, we're right beside the table with the wrestlers. And Is that Jesse Fields dressed as a Ghostbuster? Oh, LT, come over here. I gotta get a picture. Oh, look at little Jesse. He's all grown up. He's a Ghostbuster now. And I'm just like, Tony Falk wants to take a picture with me. And it just absolutely cracks me up, because like Tony, I love working with Tony, and God, I wish he was doing more with NWA, because they did that commercial spoof with him,
With
the waffles and tire iron. The moment I saw that, I immediately grabbed my phone, grabbed my credit card. I went on the website and I bought me a Tony Falk waffles and tire irons T-shirt because I said that is the greatest. As it starts off, hi, I'm Tony Falk from Paducah, Kentucky, and there are two things that I like: waffles and tire irons. I was just like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's like, please use Tony more, because like that's content. Like, if you're gonna have comedy and you're gonna have quality comedy, have Tony do it. So
I
good.
I thought it was so random that it was Tony Falk that showed up on the early NWA Powers. It was like, I literally like, Tony Falk? Like,
yeah.
But it was so perfect. It was hilarious. I've never met the guy. But
you have to.
Like I said, I've always been a fan.
You gotta meet Tony at some point. You get a chance to meet Tony.
Yeah. It is in my plans to eventually take a trip down in that area to witness some professional wrestling, because I live all the way up in the Northeast. The funny part about me living up here in the Northeast in Connecticut is I've always been a fan of Southern wrestling. So that to me is the greatest. And it's like, it's gotten to the point. I mean, I do love wrestling in New England, I think, but the style in the South is just completely different. It's a little bit more realistic in a way.
I don't adhere to many Southern stereotypes. I try to not sound Southern. I try to not look or act Southern, but I will always say that Southern wrestling is the better style. That's us.
Yeah, that's just I grew up watching, the NWA. I grew up watching, World Class, that kind of stuff. And then once I discovered Memphis, all that stuff, and I was just like, I preferred it to anything that happened up here, which was
those old Memphis days.
Yeah. Well, now I subscribe to the Wrestling Legends Network by Rock Parsons and his son Adam. And there's a ton of Memphis up there. There's a ton of Continental. It's $4 a month. It's the best.
I feel like, you know what? I did a series of TV tapings for the Parsons a couple years ago. Yeah, they brought me and another referee that was very prominent here in Nashville, Ricky Bell, and we went up somewhere in Podunk, Tennessee, to do these TV tapings, and they had us wearing the blue shirt with the bow tie, and they were telling us, like, we want this the old school. If the wrestler throws 3 punches, you warn them once, warn them twice, they throw that 3 punch, DQ them. He goes up to the top rope and jumps off the top rope, that's an automatic DQ. He throws him over the ropes, automatic DQ. So I was like, okay, we're talking NWA 70s rules. And that's how they wanted to do their TV. They didn't want the flippy style. They wanted the old school wrestling. They wanted characters and all that stuff. So I remember working for the Parsons at one point.
Now is that IWWA? Was that the name of their promotion?
I don't remember. Yeah, it was a one-off.
I think that's that is on the network. I think that's the only modern stuff. But besides, like, they put up the School of Morton shows as well. So I
refereed one match on their very first pay-per-view for School of Morton. I did a tag match.
What was it like working with? Now you've worked with Ricky quite a bit, and I know that you're quite the fan as well. And I think I mentioned at the beginning.
Love me some Ricky Morton. I got to work with him several times over the years, and it was always fun just sitting in a locker room with him, because he'd just go on these tangents, and he would tell stories, and it may be the same story you've heard, but it's still funny. And I remember I was doing a promotion in Knoxville called Kapow, and I knew I was going to be up there at the same time that they were doing their pay-per-view. And so I just sent a message to School of Morton, like, hey, I'm working with Kapow. I think I'd done work with GCW at that point. And I said, hey, I'm going to be up in Knoxville. I'd like to come up and help out with the pay-per-view. And the school messages back, like, absolutely, we know who you are. Come on up. So I come up. I get a pre-show match, and Ricky wanted me to do a tag team match because he knew that I could do tag matches. And he said, I had the body language and the facial expressions to really convey a story that they wanted. And he said that was the one match you wanted me to do. I said, absolutely. And I went out there and I did that match, and I helped tell the story like they wanted. And it's always been cool interacting with Ricky, because when I saw him at the first set of tapings that I did, he said, well, you don't belong here, do you? I said, I really don't belong here. He goes, come on. Kind of shaking me like, yeah, you belong here. And, he definitely knows how to make somebody feel welcome. And definitely, if they're nervous, he'll make them not nervous anymore. He'll be Ricky, and you immediately just start laughing, and you forget why you're frustrated or something. Kerry's the same way. Kerry's got the same attitude as his dad at times. But Kerry is a very smart kid. People do not give him credit for being as smart as he is. And he's going to be very successful in wrestling. I'll just say that.
I believe it. He's only been doing it, a couple years, a year, something to that effect. So he's got some time.
4 or 5 years.
Oh,
now.
that long.
Because I was doing Kapow shows with him in like 2020, 2021. So, he was still very green, but you could tell, like, okay, there's something with this kid.
Yeah.
Like, obviously it's a Morton. Like, that's just genetic. But
so what do you think of the recent heel turn for both of them?
I think it's invigorating, because everybody knew Ricky as a white meat babyface. I know he had times where he had been a heel, but I feel like again, you do something for so long, you get complacent and comfortable with it. Put somebody where they're uncomfortable and make them have to get comfortable with it. And for Ricky, It wasn't hard. I think for Kerry, it was a little difficult, but again,
he looks like a baby face. Yeah.
He looks like a baby face, but he also looks like that arrogant teenager who knows everything.
Right.
And I feel like that's one of his strengths, is that he can just lean into like, I know what I'm doing. I'm young, but I know what I'm doing. Like, he's got that cocky look and feel to him, and that's why I buy him as a heel. And Ricky, Ricky's an old timer. You could just easily say like, oh, everybody loves him, but he still knows all the tricks, and he knows how to cheat, and he knows how to do stuff behind the ref's back. That's why I think like Ricky will never be a full heel, because I think everybody just loves him, but people do accept him doing dirty tactics as like, he's the witty veteran, he's the old timer. So I think having those two as a heel team together, I like it. I genuinely like it.
I remember, obviously, there was the time he turned on Robert in WCW when he was coming back from I think he had an injured knee, Robert.
Yeah.
Now, I think that some people, Ricky had a really good run in CWA, I think, in early night, or was it USWA at the time? It was Memphis for sure.
Yeah, it may have been USWA.
Yeah. And at time, and now I'm going back because probably it was before he went back to WCW. So because I remember seeing him at that time period.
I have to think about that too, because the fun connection that I have to old school wrestling was my dad was a police officer in Nashville for Belle Meade, and Christine Jarrett and Jerry Jarrett, when they would run the fairgrounds, would employ Metro Police for security. And because they knew my dad really well, he ended up being one of the people that would drive the guys to Memphis for TV, or drive them to Evansville or Louisville or wherever they had to run. And I knew a bunch of the stories from back then of my dad telling me, he had to drive Bubba, Goliath, and Bruno to Fuddruckers after a show, and all these other stories. And I do remember him telling stories like, something Ricky Morton was a heel at the time, and Jeff Jarrett was still a referee. It was before Bill Dundee beat him up, and the night that Bill beats up Jeff, it was at the fairgrounds, and Christine asked my dad to make sure that Bill didn't kill him, those kind of things. So I remember hearing the stuff that when Ricky was a heel in that time, the fans were so bad. You had to have police there, because they're going to pull out knives. They're going to try to stab people.
That's the difference of time. Like wrestling then and now, the fans were invested in it in that way. You know,
Yeah.
you always hear crazy stories of people. You know, Bobby Heenan almost got shot or whatever, and you know, like guys have gotten stabbed with pins or what have you.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to, I don't remember the story because my dad told it to me a long time ago, that they walked somebody to the ring and they kind of took their positions by the barricades and whatnot. And the heel got out of the ring. It was on a different side of the ring. And they saw somebody lunge towards him with something. And either the guy had like a pocket knife or a fork or something, was trying to stab one of the heels. So they have to jump the barricade or, put him in handcuffs, call for another patrol car to come get him, and all that stuff. And it's like, man, like, we had Chicken Hat who would try to jump the barricade with a chair or try to jump in the ring, but we never ever had anybody in my time trying to stab anybody that I can recall.
Yeah,
It's just, times are just so different.
it is. So what I want you mentioned this at the about Tony Falk and the convention, is tell me about the Tennessee Ghostbusters.
Eventually that comes up. So I am I am part of a costuming group called the Tennessee Ghostbusters. I am captain in our group. So what we do is we do a lot of conventions, parades, fundraiser events, charity events. We are partnered with Dreams and Wishes of Tennessee, and we do multiple events for them throughout the year, whether it's like a Make-A-Wish kind of deal, special fundraiser events. We partner with 2 other costuming groups around the holidays, and we take all of our donations that we get, we buy toys, and we hand them out at Centennial Children's Hospital in Nashville. We are one of, I think, 25 groups worldwide that are recognized by Sony and Ghost Corps. So we are recognized by Sony for our contribution to charitable work, and we're allowed to do everything that we do without receiving a cease and desist because of the charity work. And it has also allowed us to be a part of 2 red carpet premieres. We were part of the Girls movie in 2016. They asked us to come to LA to do that. And then for Afterlife, that came out in 2021, they asked a limited number of groups to come to New York to do the premiere up there. And we were one of the groups that got to go up to New York and do the premiere. So we have the suits and everything. We didn't take all of our gear because obviously it's hard to fly with a 40-pound proton pack and trap and everything. But that's pretty much what we do. We go to conventions. We take pictures with people. They want to see the cool toys that we have that they wanted when they were growing up. I'm one of 5 people in our group that was crazy enough to dress their car up like an Ecto. I have a white Kia Soul. Anybody who has seen me at a wrestling show or knows that I'm on a wrestling show will know that I'm there because they'll look and see, oh, there's a Ghostbuster car. Jesse's here. So that is, we, like I said, we do a lot of charity events and parades and stuff. And it occasionally we've been on conventions with wrestling personalities who know me and finally get to see me wearing the Ghostbuster stuff. So
that's incredible. It really is. You guys are doing a lot out there for charity and such. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Are you going to be part of NWA 75 or the not that you know of yet?
No. And the reason why is because that's an athletic commission state and they require a license. I'm not licensed in Missouri, and I was not asked to get my license for that. I don't want to divulge too much about what NWA does. I do know that they primarily want to stick with 3 referees for their shows. They don't. It's not like it used to be where they had 4 or 5. I think 3 is a good number for shows because you have the right number of matches for the right number of people, but it's not like that dedicated 3. So if somebody can't make it, they'll call in myself, or I think Rob King is another referee that they'll call in, or somebody that they know that's in the area. And it's just kind of it's as needed thing, which is good for me because even though I'm not working for them full time, I do know that I still have opportunities with them. I'd give anything for that to be the one promotion, though. I don't have a home promotion anymore. I don't really have one that I call home. And if I was going to pick one, and it would be the one that I would stay with until I retire, it would be NWA. The positivity of that locker room and the way that I was treated as somebody that half the people didn't know, only a handful of people knew who I was or knew of me, and all these other people didn't know me from Adam. They did not treat me like an outsider. I was welcomed in with open arms. I did not feel like I didn't belong. I felt like this was a really great place, and I was like, this could be a home. I want this to be home because everybody there was just so great. And I kind of bonded with several people on the Chicago loop, and I was like, man, I really want to be on more loops because I just want to hang out with these guys and cut up and BS and talk about non-wrestling stuff because it was great. It was one of the greatest things. I could talk music and other stuff with these guys and not have to talk wrestling, and it was wonderful. And it was like, God, I really wish NWA would go back to using 4 or 5 refs, because then, I could be full time, but it's out of my hands.
It's all right. That's all right. Someday, maybe.
Fingers crossed.
So what else does referee Jesse Fields have coming up?
I'm doing a show for Imperial Wrestling in Bristol, Tennessee, August 19th, which is, as we're recording this on Sunday, it is this upcoming Saturday. This past Friday, I was doing Paradigm Wrestling in Jeffersonville, Indiana. We did our tapings for about 2 months. 7 p.m. to about 1 a.m. in the morning. Very, very exhausted. Our next show for Paradigm is November 4th. It is the anniversary show, so I know that's going to be a big deal. I believe I'll be with GCW in Atlanta. I think November 3rd is Paradigm. November 4th is GCW, so I'm going to have to go from Jeffersonville to Atlanta. I'll come home and then drive down to Atlanta. Other than that, I don't really have any other dates that I'm aware of right now. I've gotten to where I'm very selective. I'm not going to start working. I don't want to work every show every weekend. I quality over quantity is where I'm at.
Right. Right.
I think I've hit that point where it's like I'm just going to work for places that I know that are good, going to treat people well. So I've kind of just limited it down to just a few promotions now. I'm waiting to hear back from Warrior Wrestling because I work with them periodically, so I'll probably be back up in the Chicago area, hopefully sometime this year. I do love going to Chicago. I go up there for the food. So
I'm going to be up there probably either later this year or earlier next year for a show. Talk about that off air at some point because I don't want to give too many details on here. Maybe it'll line up. If it lines up,
maybe.
Then...
Yeah, because I know they're doing StarCast weekend, Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
I think StarCast weekend is up there. GCW's only doing 2 shows. I'm not on those 2 shows only because typically when we would run that kind of weekend, we had like 4 or 5, and we would need to rotate referees. I would work medical on certain shows that I didn't have to referee on, and then other ones I would just referee on. I do know that I'll probably be in Philly for the Collective next year because it's for WrestleMania weekend. It's Philly. I don't want to miss Philly. Philly's another town that I absolutely love going to for the food and historical stuff. Getting to visit the USS Olympia, going across the river to the Jersey, seeing the battleship over there. So it's like, I got other things outside of wrestling I love doing in those cities, but those are the only dates that I really know of right now. Like I said, things can change. Somebody could hit me up like, hey, we need you to do the show in October or whatever. So.
So tell me where you could be found on the socials and where everybody else listening could find you.
I am pretty much on all of the socials. It's Jesse the Ref on Facebook. That is my personal page. Referee Jesse Fields is my professional page on Facebook. Jesse the Ref is Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and I think it may be the TikTok that I've got, but it's mainly, I only have it just to put some dumb stuff up periodically and to watch all the dumb stuff my friends send me. But I'm primarily on Twitter, X, whatever it is, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm trying to be a little bit more interactive with people now. I try to engage in like music conversations and topic discussions and things like that. I used to not be I didn't have a big social footprint, so I'm trying to like get my presence out there. So when I'm promoting stuff for like NWA, it's reaching an audience that they didn't typically get to. So,
Right.
So those are the main socials. I'm usually very, very quick to respond to questions, messages, comments, feedback, whatever. Phone's usually within arm's reach of me. So.
Right. I want to thank you for joining me for this this hour, and I look forward to having you back down the road.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's professional wrestling's greatest, largest, privately owned wrestling library. All the classic hits, flips, slams, and pins of yesteryear are on one place. It's Ultimate Classic Wrestling. Check out the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Mr. USA Tony Atlas, Tito Santana, Rick Martel, a who's who of professional wrestling's greatest spotlight stars ever to grace the squared circle, all in one place. Grab the best seat in the house for memories and mayhem on Ultimate Classic Wrestling.